I'm the Executive Vice President for the Greater Irvine Chamber of Commerce, and the Chamber is the winner of the 2018 Presidential E-Award for Export Services, and we have export online documentation for documents at our Chamber. So that's why we're so involved and so engaged in the international activities on behalf of our businesses. Now, we have three wonderful organizations working with us today to produce this program. I do want to give a very special thank you to the Canadian Consul for their outreach to us, asking us to please be part of producing this webinar event so we can help our Orange County exporters and businesses. So thank you. One small alert for you today, because we are working remotely. If my internet should fail, my good colleague Beryl Unver with the Canadian Consul will be stepping in just to keep the discussion moving along. And then I will step back in as soon as my internet is available. So let's go ahead and begin our program. And I want to share with you the North America world's largest free trade zone overview of what the USMCA means today in comparison to NAFTA. Most people with a knowledgeable reading of the new USMCA will tell you that it is indeed a improvement on NAFTA, and that it's not entirely a new agreement. Starting out, however, with the 26 years since the North American Free Trade Agreement entered into the force, a 19 trillion regional market with some 470 million consumers exists from the united economies of Canada, the US, and Mexico. And our very own US Chamber figures that 8 million US jobs are associated with the trade with Canada alone, and another 6 million US jobs with trade with Mexico. So as you can see, this is very big business and it generates a huge economy. The United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, USMCA, is an updated version of NAFTA. It's comprised of 34 chapters and 12 side letters, and it was signed by all parties, and it enters into force on July 1 of this year. I wanted to go over a few key updates with you from the USMC, so you can follow along when our experts are sharing with you some of the details of this activity. And the USMC, we call it being modernized for the 21st century. Thanks to Canada particularly, the importance of gender equality was built in to the new USMCA, where it didn't exist before. And we're very pleased about that, and everyone agreed to it. While NAFTA was the first trade treaty to include intellectual trade property protections in the early days of IP, innovation has obviously rendered those original provisions obsolete and or at least requiring updating. So you'll find considerable IP upgrades to the new USMCA. The new USMCA also brings into the 21st century the digital trade and investment in innovative products and services component. And that means that digital chapters and everything to do with e-commerce is now covered and recognized by this agreement. In addition, we have some new environmental and labor chapters, what we consider to be stronger and more enforceable standards. And these include enhanced labor provisions that are enforceable under the standard state-to-state dispute resolution system. And there's an entire chapter that's dedicated to it. So that has been improved. There's a dedicated chapter on small and medium-sized enterprises. This should make all of the small businesses happy because there's between all three countries, we're looking for considerable improvement in the small and medium-sized business investment opportunities between the three countries. Dairy and agriculture, which is one of the more controversial measures, interestingly enough, but NAFTA eliminated the tariffs on most agricultural products between the three countries, and Canada and Mexico being the two biggest exporters. But USMCA keeps those tariffs at zero. And while further opening up the Canadian market to US dairy, poultry, and eggs, in return, the US will allow more Canadian dairy, peanuts, peanut products, as well as a limited amount of sugar. There is a couple of things regarding the dispute resolution and sunset clause I want to mention because that also made some headlines. The country-to-country dispute resolution mechanism is maintained, as is the anti-dumping and countervailing duty dispute. The investor state dispute resolution is eliminated between Canada and the US, but it's been maintained between the US and Mexico. The sunset clause, which you hear people talk about, is to remain in effect for 16 years, and at which time they can choose to revisit and or renegotiate the terms or withdraw from the agreement. 6 years on from this date, that would be 2026, the sunset clause can be revisited and potentially extended if the parties find it beneficial. Some of the other more prominent aspects of the renegotiation included the auto rules. You may remember that originally it was 62.5% of North American content between the borders. Now that's been increased to 75% of the component parts and materials between the three countries. Also, 70% of the steel and aluminum used in the production is to be sourced within North America. And there is a new labor content value, which requires automakers to demonstrate at least 40% of the content of a car, 45% for a truck, must be sourced from facilities that pay workers a minimum wage of at least $16 US an hour. So with that basic understanding of some of the top line changes that have occurred with that agreement, I want to take this opportunity to introduce our most prestigious and quite frankly, very brilliant experts on this subject matter. And we're going to have a discussion today. We have some questions that we hope will help inform you. I want to introduce our first speaker, Zaib Shaikh. Zaib began his mandate as Consul General of Canada in Los Angeles in December 2018. He is the Government of Canada's senior representative in Southern California, Arizona, and Nevada. He comes to the posting after an extensive career in the media and entertainment industries, which is why he looks so good on camera. From 2014 until his appointment in 2018, Mr. Shaikh was the film commissioner and director of entertainment industries for the city of Toronto. He has served as a board member for the Institute for Canadian Citizenship, the Canadian Centre for Diversity and Inclusion, and most recently on the board of AFC, Actors Fund of Canada. He's also served on juries and committees for the Gemini Awards, the ACTRA Awards, Ontario Arts Council, and Theatre Ontario Youth Program, as well as an ambassador for the Centre for Addiction and Mental Health and for Amnesty International Canada. All right, taking a deep breath, let us move to our colleague and friend representing Mexico perspective, and that would be Carlos Gimenez. Carlos is the Consul for Economic Affairs at the Consulate General of Mexico in Los Angeles, starting in 2013. He's been a career diplomat since 1992. He was the first secretary of the Mexican Foreign Service. He's worked in several areas of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He's been the Deputy Director for Africa, General Direction for Africa and Middle East, Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Mexico, Economic and Political Affairs, Embassy of Mexico in Chile, Economic and Cooperation Affairs, Embassy of Mexico in Uruguay, Consular Affairs and Head of Icelandic Affairs, Embassy of Mexico in Norway, and Head of Departments of Sub-Regional Organisms, India and China successively, General Direction for Asia Pacific, Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Mexico, an advisor and coordinator of economic affairs. And before joining the Foreign Service, he worked in the private sector, directing chemistry and material in Condimex Research and Development Center. That is a global resume, Carlos, and we're delighted to have you with us today. And last but certainly not least, prepared to share the U.S. perspective from a business owner's perspective is Ken Wengrod, is one of the country's leading financial advisors and co-founder of FTC Commercial Corporation. 18 years now. A global commercial finance corporation with domestic and international clients, primarily serving the apparel industry and consumer products. FTC has factored over $3 billion and supported operations that have grown from startup to over $40 million in annual sales. Some of the major labels include Justin Timberlake, Tom's Shoes, Joe Jean's Kids, Maui and Sons, and others. His experience includes 35 years of running numerous factoring operations for banks, managing a large manufacturing and retail operation, as well as set up and owning 2 of his own successful apparel companies. As a fashion industry expert, this gives him an extensive understanding of the entire trade cycle of manufacturing, importing, exporting, from design concept to sale. U.S. Secretary of Commerce Ross appointed Ken to the Trade Finance Advisory Council, and he's vice chair of the subcommittee Private-Public Partnerships, and to the prestigious District Export Council, Southern California, serving on its executive committee and chair of Finance Committee. In 2018, U.S. Secretary of Commerce presented Ken and the FTC the President's E Award for Export Service, and most recently, he was appointed by Secretary Ross to the Industry Trade Advisory Committee on Small and Minority Businesses. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have, as I said, a very expert and prestigious panel. And now we're going to allow them to share their incredible wealth of information and familiarity with the subject matter. And I'm going to kick it off by I'm going to ask you, Zaib, first, if you'll respond, and then we'll just move through from Carlos to Ken. Gentlemen, we are 3 weeks away from the implementation of USMCA. Please tell us what your countries are particularly excited about in terms of updates since the days of NAFTA. And then, Ken, I'm going to ask you a question about how you think those provisions are going to affect and impact businesses. So, Zaib, if you'll please tell me, and Carlos as well, what your countries are most pleased or excited about.
Thanks so much, Linda, and thanks everyone for joining us. It's important to note that that 3-week date that you mentioned, Linda, it denotes July 1st, which happens to be Canada Day. And so I know the country, as well as the continent, are going to be very pleased that this agreement goes into effect. Now, some of the things that you already mentioned in your overview are some of the things that are the most exciting for Canada, frankly. First of all, it's the most modern agreement, trade agreement in the world, and that is something special that Canada is a part of, and also Canada led the way in terms of what it means to be a modern agreement. It means that there are digital provisions, the idea of IP, what it means to have digital access. Those kinds of, frankly, even phrases and clauses, and even that word for that to be in the agreement is very exciting. As you also mentioned, gender equality. This is monumental for Canada to have that in there because Canada fought for it to be there, fought in words and facts. trade is not gender neutral, you know? And so while Canada wasn't able to get the other two governments to agree to the creation of an actual gender chapter wording to promote equality in the workplace, to help remove barriers faced by women, entrepreneurs and business owners, it's woven throughout the agreement. And in fact, Section 23 contains specifically a provision against discrimination by employers, including on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. So it's even going beyond this idea of what women entrepreneurs and business owners may have experienced in the past. But also from what we a gender-based analysis plus to take in sexual orientation and gender identity. Environmental standards also amazingly were not central to NAFTA, as we know, but are so much more visibly enforced in USMCA through Chapter 24, with updates based on another global agreement, the CPTPP. So, you know, wildlife tracking, illegal logging, illegal fishing, subsidies, marine pollution. These are these are covered under it and definitely not allowed. Now, despite, again, Canadian efforts, the USMCA does not necessarily reflect climate change directly, but it does account for clean technology in a non-binding section. And also, it's got a Council on Environmental Cooperation as part of its secretariat and advisory committee. So that is something that is key and exciting for Canada. And then ultimately something that, okay, I'll stop.
Yeah. No, thank you, Zaib. I appreciate that. Carlos, please share with us from your perspective, what is Mexico excited about? What are you pleased at having achieved?
Well, Mexico is excited about the strengthening of the competitiveness in North America. This is very important for Mexico, very important for the region. And of course, we consider very important the greater participation of the small and medium-sized company, because they are job generator, a big job generator. And it's important to include in not only the big companies, also the medium and small companies in the supply chain. This new era of the agreement, I think, is important to give the possibility to participate all these companies in the agreement and obtain the opportunity to grow and participate in this. The fight against the act of corruption is important as well, go in line with the proposals of the new government of Mexico. The infrastructure as well, the gender incorporation, and the creation of a labor chapter as well. This is important for Mexico as well, because go also in line with the proposals of the new government. But one of the important things of this new agreement is that take advantage of the opportunities of the 21st century economy. In fact, the development of the digital economy is very important at this time. When was started the NAFTA, the idea of the digital economy was not exist, but nowadays is very important, and this agreement taking account this. And promotion of a trade and investment certainty is also important for Mexico. The establishment of a functional dispute resolution system. Another thing that is important is the country agreed on a periodic review mechanism that allows to update the agreement with long-term vision. The agreement, as you say before, the the agreement incorporates a 16 years clause that states that the terms of the agreement will expire after this period. The treaty is subject to a review every 6 years when the parties may decide a extended duration of the USMCA. And the concept of sudden death was eliminated. That is very good for the certainty in the long run. And there is a review clause that will help to have a broader participation and support for the USMCA by the civil society, the companies, all the companies in general, as it will open the channels to constantly receive recommendations, not on how to improve its operation. This is important. It's open to all the time to receive the contributions of the companies.
Thank you, Carlos. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Ken, turning to you, you know, as someone who's engaged in the private sector, what does USMCA mean to a business owner who's looking to, you know, use exporting as a growth strategy and or currently exporting between Canada and Mexico? What's this going to mean to them?
Linda, the USMCA is going to be an incredible tool for the US manufacturers, because more and more what we've learned from COVID, that people were importing from other locations around the world. This agreement is going to put the strength of our three countries together, and it will greatly reduce costs. What people have never really spent the time and recognized is what some of the true benefits of our region. And one, besides labor prices in Mexico and Canada, and China are almost on par, but there are other benefits. Electricity. Mexico and Canada and the US have some of the lowest electric costs in the world, and almost on par, if not exceeding, lower prices than China. And the other big advantage is freight costs. You know, a container could be $5,000. It's only $500 to ship a truck back and forth. And most people never looked at the idle time on the water for 2 to 3 weeks. So these benefits are going to be dramatic to do more nearshoring and inshoring in the US. This agreement has done an incredible job, and I see significant changes. One, it's creating a level playing field for all of us, but also to give us an inducement to do business with each other as teams. And there's approximately, there was almost $50 billion of companies have done business between Mexico and Canada, just in California and those regions. And what I see on some parts of this agreement is labor. Most people have not recognized there are millions and millions of women we call ghost workers that are getting paid below minimum age, minimum wage, and some of them are in forced labor conditions. And the provision in the labor section specifically prevents importation of forced labor or child labor, an extremely important provision. I mean, we all talked about the $16, you know, for auto parts in the auto industry, which really probably won't. I know Mexico's been been supportive of that, which is important, because our labor costs in that industry is, you know, over $20, $30 an hour. So it definitely created a level playing field. But for California in particular, there's been a new provision on digital trade. It was not in NAFTA. And it ensures that data can move between borders. There's not going to be duty on those, protects proprietary rights. It is not going to be duty on digital products. An extremely important event, especially in today with internet and online business. The IP has also been modernized, which is, it's not only that it's been modernized, but there's some teeth to the agreement. there's the first time ex officio authority for law enforcement to go after pirate and counterfeit goods, which affects U.S. goods in particular, about making dupes and knockoffs, affected not only the apparel industry, but in pharma and supplemental, which is a big industry in Irvine and in Orange County. So there are some big changes. The rules of origin, you know, it's going to be more and more U.S. goods and goods coming through the USMCA countries to begin with. The other big important change is the SME chapter. It really looks at how to protect the SMEs. There are 82,000 SMEs that exported to Mexico and Canada. This chapter really cuts the red tape, makes items flow smoother, and it increased the de minimis, which is important. So now goods, I believe it's $50 from Mexico, and I think there was a $1,500 or $2,500 level for goods that can move freely between the countries. Again, this is extremely important for internet-based companies and doing online sales direct to consumers. So those are—
Thank you. Thank you, Ken.
You're
Thanks very much. Yeah, that's a good start, gentlemen. Thank you. All of you have touched on this issue, but here's your opportunity to go a little further. Generally, we don't like to look back, but we're curious, were there provisions in NAFTA that, that you wish had remained in the USMCA? And if so, why? And tell me what provisions of the USMCA now you think are going to, again, stimulate the North American trade economy most greatly. Zaib, would you like to start?
Thanks, Linda. I think we have to bear in mind that all three countries are really big on this agreement. And, you know, my colleagues and you, Linda, have successfully, I think, outlined why. I think it's important to also remember that, in fact, NAFTA itself was updated 12 times in the 25, years of its lifetime. And so regardless of where things are at currently, and I do think they're at the most modern place, and again, we've outlined exactly how and why, the idea of gender, environment, the idea of digital, the idea of SMEs being included, those chapters, those side agreements. This is all incredibly key to a modern agreement. It allows an agreement to be, and this agreement in particular, to be nimble. And nimbleness is what's needed right now, as we know, as Ken mentioned, in terms of the pandemic and so many other socio-political and global supply chain issues. Nimbleness is going to be key. So I would say that USMCA really builds on what NAFTA had to offer, frankly, and builds on it in a great extent. But of course, as I mentioned earlier, there are aspects of the agreement which we think, Canada thinks, it will continue to forge new ground for as USMCA looks to improve. Just as NAFTA did 12 times over 25 years, we expect USMCA will be renewed in its continuation. There will be more discussions, there'll be more agreements. And so we would seek to revisit the incorporation of a gender chapter, of course, and some climate change, some clarity on that climate change language into the environmental chapter. And we'll continue to actually improve on even all the other things, as Ken mentioned, the IP, as Carlos mentioned, the advantages for SMEs. This is key to Canada's export and import possibilities, the FDI that comes into the country. So for us, we're looking forward to those continued dialogues, and we don't think anything is wrong with the agreement, but there's always, as the time changes, as we progress decades from now, there will be improvements needed, and this agreement allows for those discussions and agreements to take place and to be modernized.
Splendid. Thank you. Carlos, looking at this from the perspective of Mexico, I was fortunate enough to spend some time in Mexico shortly after our president, shall we say, challenged Mexico. And it was very heated at that time. I'm curious from that perspective, were there elements of NAFTA that Mexico felt strongly about retaining, and or what are you looking forward to perhaps improving or building on with USMCA moving forward?
Lo mismo. Sorry. I think the NAFTA was at that time in 1994 an avant-garde agreement that showed the way for many countries in the world. Was the reference for other treaties in other continents in this hemisphere as well. And nowadays, the new USMCA is again an avant-garde agreement, taking account new the advance of technology, the advance of science, the new situation of the world, the importance of the chains of the supply chains, and many other topics that are very important. Once the new treaty starts in the 1st of July, we're gonna have a new avant-garde treaty. And I think many things change, another didn't. But I think all the new, the things that are working well don't need to move much. But the situation of the new, the new things in the world, the new techniques, the new economic rules and economy is taken in account in this new agreement. I think when you are negotiating a new agreement or agreement, whatever, you give and you receive. And sometimes not all the things are the best for you. But in a whole, taking into account all the agreement has been fantastic. I think is good for the three countries, an opportunity to take in account, to know all the content for the companies, to be in contact with authorities, to be in contact with experts, with be in contact with the Chamber of Commerce like you, to show the way, to help, to take advantage of all the new provisions, the new chapters, and is really a good opportunity for all the companies in many areas to know indeed this agreement and take advantage. I think seminars, webinars as this is important to give the people all the information about. And this opened the door to know more doubts, to want to have more information about, and be in contact with you, with all the organization that have more experience and tools to help the companies.
All right. Carlos, thank you so much. Ken, turning to you, again, looking at it from a business owner's perspective, were there provisions of NAFTA that you think the businesses are going to be lamenting, and or do you think that USMCA has generally improved the conditions for the U.S. Manufacturer and business owner?
USMCA has definitely helped the U.S. business owner. And some of the biggest changes are the simplicity of reducing red tape. What entrepreneurs like myself always have a problem with dealing with governments, a bureaucracy. So what this agreement has done, especially in the SME chapter, is find ways to reduce those red tapes and also put some teeth into the agreement. And it opened up also from a entrepreneur with the provision dealing that that we as US companies do not have to have a foreign office to do business or create companies in either Mexico or Canada. And that elimination was really important. Another aspect is really taking advantage of this group, because we can now look at the benefits of Mexico, Canada, and the US. I'm talking strictly as an entrepreneur. And instead of doing manufacturing in Asia, especially with the productivity and the improvements of the supply chain, we should be able to greatly reduce our costs and set up facilities right here in our backyard and maximize the benefits of the United States, Canada, and Mexico. This will greatly reduce cost, make our companies more profitable, and extremely more competitive on the world markets. And to me, that's really important. I only looked at this strictly as a positive. Another big thing for US companies, there was a provision in here regarding currency manipulation. You know, most free trade agreements never addressed currency manipulation. But in this agreement, there is a provision, and that's important. And there's another part that if any one of our countries in this agreement is talking regarding another free trade agreement, they have to talk to the US, Mexico, and Canada independently and to discuss that. So it opens up an understanding of how do we make this better? How do we work together amongst our three countries? And also it closed the gap between NAFTA and the USMCA. So that's the way I perceive it.
Well, thank you very much. You know, the elephant in the room, because the pandemic is not the provision of any one country in the world, but it's had a terrific impact on the global economy. All of you gentlemen have mentioned the fact that you see this as an opportunity for North America. Please share with us a little more precisely where you think the greatest benefits will come, quite frankly, as a consequence of having to turn closer to our countries to achieve economic prosperity. Zaib, would you like to start?
Sure, thank you, Linda. And I think part of the value of these types of discussions, but also in terms of the actual work, are, as we've mentioned, chambers like yourselves. That idea of going into the community, understanding the community's business and community landscape, what makes that up, who makes that up, the kinds of businesses, the kinds of sectors and industries that are really key to driving the economy of that territory is so valuable. And so business chambers play an immensely valuable part of that puzzle. They're an immensely valuable piece of that puzzle, I should say. So as it relates to what's happening with the pandemic, and of course, I hope everyone is safe and healthy as can be, because this has affected, it's indiscriminate. We talk a lot about this last couple of weeks about discrimination in so many ways, but this disease, this virus, this pandemic, it does not discriminate. And therefore it has affected not just people, but it's affected supply chains. And it's most importantly, in a way, because of how many people it's affected the global economy. In April 2020, the World Economic Forum warned from the IMF that 5.9% drop would happen in the US, a 6.2 drop in Canada, and a 6.6 drop in Mexico by the end of 2020. That is vital to notice, because that incorporates three of the world's most important trading partners because of NAFTA and USMCA. So USMCA allows for even greater ease and greater good for the three countries to work with each other and to integrate their economies together. And in order to avoid, frankly, the dampening of a reset or recovery, our three countries are going to have to commit to removing those lingering barriers that do exist Protectionist measures such as Buy America, I'll be honest, do not help our three countries. If we're really all in this together, and I think the pandemic, as you rightly pointed out, Linda, has shown that we need to be all in this together. We need to be buying and making things for North America. Already the global supply chain, as it relates to our continent, supplies and services pass borders, not just on a daily or weekly basis, but on an hourly basis. We need to keep that identity of a collective North America for the security of our land, air, and seas and our people, but also for the security of our economies, really top of mind. And so I'd say that's one of the key ways that we can make sure that we have a good recovery and a good reset.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Carlos, same question to you from the perspective of Mexico. The pandemic, unfortunately, has disrupted so much. This is an opportunity in an odd kind of way for the three countries to work better together. How do you see that happening? What do you think are going to be the greatest positive benefits that come from the pandemic impact?
Yes, the pandemic produced a significant effect on supply and demand worldwide, in all the countries, in all the continents. In addition to these effects of offer and demand, a lot of specific effects on supply chains that maybe we don't know at this time, but exist, and gradually we are going to evaluate and need to assimilate them. As various analysts and experts have pointed out, the current pandemic will modify the world economic structure. And this is in the time that this is the way we buy and we sell things. Many other things related with this topic, with the purpose of the supply chains. And this will lead the world to explore new ways to collaboration, to mitigate this negative economic effect of the COVID-19. The entry into force of the USMCA on July 1st will be a very powerful signal to the world of the search for the cooperation in trade. At the time when the multilateral trade system has not shown much vigor, the World Trade Organization is not functioning very well now. And if we add the pandemic and the situation in the world, the signals of the starting of this new agreement will be very important for the world. A new generation, an avant-garde agreement that starts in this special moment when the supply chains are disrupted. And these three countries in North America are working in harmonization of the things related with the essential companies, essential products, essential supply chains is very important. It's a very powerful signal to the world. And this is reflected in the investment, in the productive investment in the countries. I think this gives confidence to the investors to think in North America, in the countries, and the well work done, and it's a possibility to increase the wealthiness of the three countries. I think it's very good in these special times, in this special moment for the three countries.
Thanks, Carlos. Yeah, it's okay. So it's Ken, to you. It certainly sounds like we have two partners that might see a little silver lining here, and that this sort of magnifies the positive impact of the USMCA. Again, from a business owner's perspective, looking at it through the lens of, Orange County, Southern California, where do you see the more positive aspects of the impact that the pandemic has had on our economy?
To say it bluntly, if I don't want to use the word, I'll just be very careful on my language. It friggin' woke us up. We got to stop the bull. People have been friggin' sleeping. We looked at our farmer industry. So much of our production was offshore in Asia. We were getting ripped off on IP, with these state-owned enterprises. But it's not only China. It was also India. India has been re-engineering our farmer for years, our drugs, our patents, and coming out. And with these rules on NAFTA, is it going to happen? I'm sorry, with USMCA, is it going to happen overnight? No, it's going to take time. But the supply chain, people, entrepreneurs, and companies are looking at things totally differently. The first thing they're realizing is it's not about labor anymore. There are more cars produced in the United States today than ever before with less workers. It's about productivity. And that's extremely important. It's about idle time, which we call queue time. How long does it take to go from China to the US or Mexico and Canada, back and forth? We take our San Joaquin cotton in the United States, ship it to China to spin it, 2 or 3 weeks on the water. They make something called gray goods, bring it back another 2 to 3 weeks. Why don't we build a spinning plant here? It does not use many people. It costs about $40 million, and it probably takes 2 to 3 people to keep that factory going and 1 to keep the other 2 awake. And it doesn't use much water. It's humidity based, but it uses electricity. But with solar power and other things, there are companies in Europe that are totally sustainable. So we have to readdress, to go back to our region and here for nearshoring and inshoring for cluster manufacturing. We saw that with a Taiwanese, one of the largest producers of semiconductors, moving to the US and Arizona. That's going to help our region, because it's going to be about maximizing efficiency and innovation, and how we can do that amongst the 3 of us. This agreement not only set a level playing field, but it eased the way that we can do business. We now have to induce, before we talk about changing supply chains, in textiles in particular, in apparel, the issue is it's not going to move that much from so-called China. The Chinese labor costs have gone up so dramatically that they've already moved to Bangladesh, Vietnam, and other low-cost producing areas. But the fabric, the actual textiles, that's where the mills are domiciled in China. So we have to talk about moving that. Well, it's not only in the apparel and textile industry, there are other industries. So it's going to take time to move the key components and create this cluster manufacturing concept, which is what built the United States to begin with during the Industrial Revolution.
All right. Thank you, Ken. Thanks. That's pretty positive uptake from all the gentlemen. We actually have a couple of questions, and interestingly enough, they come from someone who's a dual citizen of the US and Canada. So the first question has to do with something that you had mentioned, Zaib, earlier about the environment. That, how have the environmental side of the agreement been altered or improved, and reducing harm to public and environmental health, and how much further would you like to see it go, let's say 6 years from now, if it's revisited, so that California and Canada become the vanguard?
Thank you, Linda, and thank you to the person asking the question, and glad you're a dual citizen. I think I talked about Sorry, I think I talked about, as you mentioned, the idea of what it means for Canada to even have words and concepts such as environment in the new agreement. And so for us, the coverage, as I mentioned, of wildlife tracking, illegal logging, illegal fishing, the fishery subsidies, and marine pollution. These are key. The idea that this agreement even covers topics like that in a way that NAFTA just didn't, that's a big improvement. Now, the USMCA, as I said, does not reference climate change directly. And as we go into renewals and discussions, I think Canada, and I know that Canada will hope and will argue for that inclusion directly to come into the agreement. But as I mentioned before, it does reference clean technology in a non-binding section on environmental goods and carbon storage, another key modernization, a modern concept, if you will, even though it isn't a modern concept, but the idea of making it part of an agreement is definitely a modern concept. The fact that carbon storage coverage comes in the sustainable forest management section of the agreement is also key, especially for Canada. Of course, for all three countries, but Canada sees its value to the global health, if you will, supply chain as it relates to forest management. And then significantly, the USMCA does incorporate a Council on Environmental Cooperation. And that's going to be key. Cooperation is going to be the key word of the concept of the day as it relates to not only a big agreement, but global environmental challenges. And right now, the world is not necessarily at a global cooperative status. And Canada will always fight for the world and itself as a country within the North American framework to be seen as a leader in discussing the environment.
Thanks, Zaib. Appreciate it. The same question to Carlos and Ken, if you'd like to comment on the environmental sections of the USMCA.
Well, the environment is a very important issue for Mexico, and the things related with the sea, with the rivers inside the country, and the polluted areas like Mexico City, that is a huge city that you find the fifth of the country in this area of Mexico City and metropolitan area. The importance of the environment for Mexico is huge, and Mexico, it goes very close to California. California is a leader in this matter. They use new technologies in houses, the new technology for vehicles, the many things related with to clean the seas, to clean the port, to use the energy, the renewable energy in vehicles. And this is the direction that Mexico is going, and Mexico is working and fulfill all the international agreements in this issue, and working with California in many areas, taking in account that California is one of the more advanced states or economies in the world. This is important, and economic sectors in Mexico, like the energy, are working very hard on that. And we are working in different fronts that are very, very visible in Mexico. If you go to Cancun, for example, that is a wonderful place to visit. You sometimes in the year you can find some type of how do you say a product of the sea that goes to the coast, and this is an impact of the world, of the temperature of the seas, and all this is important to take in account. I think the agreement is has given some steps forward in this sense, and in other agreements in the world is not treated this issue. I think it's an opportunity to new companies, to new technology, to new opportunities for entrepreneurs, for technological companies to take advantage of this possibility. There are a lot of companies in our Irvine and Orange County and Los Angeles area working on this type of things. I think it's an opportunity to be in contact with companies in some parts of Mexico that are working on that as well. An opportunity to start with new new supply chains in this area. It's a good opportunity inside this agreement.
Thank you. Ken, you want to make some quick comments, and then we're going to have to close out pretty quick?
Sure. When we look at COVID, again, it woke us up. We looked at our environment. People weren't driving. Production was down. Look how clean our environment became, our air quality, especially in our region. And I'm very encouraged to what Carlos was saying, because it's something that needs to be fixed. And it's great that the US and Mexico are working so hard, especially down in San Diego and Orange County. You know, there's always a lot of pollution from sewage treatments and other areas. So it's hard to take back our natural resources if we don't continue to protect them. And that's from an individual. You know, we've seen in the past, a lot of US manufacturers ran down to Mexico 30, 40 years ago because our own standards were, you know, high. So they would do in rattan furniture and other things, and dyeing and finishing, they were producing it there, but it was hurting that environment, which is also our environment. Together, it comes back. So I think it's really important that we work together as teams and find ways to solve problems and remove excuses. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And that's going to be our wrap question here. I'm going to tell you something. All these questions that have been coming up, gentlemen, have all essentially the same thread, which is if the USMCA gives us a good platform upon which to build, how can we strengthen the relationship between the three countries so that we take full advantage and optimize all the benefits that can accrue? What do we need to do as countries and as private citizens to focus on the very best we can? Anybody can jump in.
Well, I think it's important to understand that because of NAFTA, set us up really well in this region. We've got a $19 trillion regional market with 470 million consumers approximately. 8 million jobs in the US depend on trade with Canada, and 6 million depend on trade with Mexico for the US. That is an integrated economy. And I think, as we've also discussed, COVID has really, this pandemic has really made it apparent and clear that unity is going to lead us through regional unity. At the end of the day, there were really big numbers being talked about as it related to what USMCA could do for all three countries. It was going to raise the US GDP by $68.2 billion by its 6th year. The Commission also determined that 176,000 jobs would be added to the economy. within that sixth year. Now, of course, COVID and the pandemic and all the socioeconomic issues that are going to come from that in the supply chain are going to put a dampen on that or delay it. But what's necessary is that idea of unity, because these statistics don't climb unless we're united as a region. We are the global safety, a harbor in a real global storm, economically, but also health-wise. And a region like Southern California, as Ken mentioned, in its health sciences, doing all the great work that all our practitioners and our R&D folks are doing, and the frontline folks, that's going to be needed for the world. But it's going to come from all three of us. It's not just going to come from one source. And together, we can help the world, I think.
Well said. Carlos, Ken, we are at our 11 o'clock mark. Would you like to weigh in with just some quick closing comments on that?
Yes, I think the 20 years ago, 26 years ago, in Mexico, the people know a little about the United States and Canada, and nowadays the people know a lot of United States, a lot of economy, politics, environment, and many other things. And also with Canada, we know a lot of Canada, and we have an increase in commerce, an increase in cooperation, an increase in all the areas, all the sectors. I think to have a common platform for being in contact and talk and make things together is an important matter. And this USMCA is a new step forward in this sense. I think it's important to know the agreement, to take advantage of all the possibilities, and of course in this consulate and the Consulate of Canada, we are ready to help and to be in contact with you, with the chambers, to help the people in this direction.
Well said, Carlos. Well said. Well said. Ken, you have look, bring us home, Ken.
Okay.
Yeah, 30 seconds.
The bottom line is, we go back to a movie, The Field of Dream. And you shall build a playing field, and they shall come. USMCA is just a starting point. It's creating the playing field, and entrepreneurs will maximize the efficiency of that. The most important thing from an American perspective, yes, we import, but we really need to take much more time. We've been very insular on exporting and understanding. 95% is outside our region. We should be exploring ways, especially between US and Mexico. The thing we need to do and focus on in the US is understanding, as Carlos said, cultures and subcultures. The more we educate ourselves and understand other people, you can't just do business with each other unless we understand each other and truly get down to those subcultures. Then this takes time, but we have to be open-minded together. And that's the way I see it.
Well, all right. On that inspirational note from all three of you, thank you very, very much for joining us. Ken Wengrod and Carlos Gimenez and Zaib Shaikh, we are so grateful for your expertise and for your time today. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for the Consulate of Canada for reaching out to the Chamber to produce this wonderful webinar. And thank you, my friends and colleagues, forward on July 1.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Linda. Thank you. Thanks, Jen. Bye-bye.